Welcome back to the Street Photography Magazine podcast. I'm Bob Patterson, founder of Street Photography Magazine, and Ashley Riffo is here again. That's like 3 in a row. Thanks for doing it, Ashley.
I'm breaking records.
Yeah, yep. That's good. And our guest today is Doug Bruns, currently living in the Baltimore area, so he's not too far away. And we're recording this after the storm of the century, the day after the storm of the century, which fortunately wasn't. Anyway, so we're dealing with a lot of cold up here in the Mid-Atlantic. And Doug, thanks for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm honored and thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, I've listened to a lot of the podcasts. So not only thank you for having me on, but thanks for the work you guys are doing. It's quite the empire you're building to the benefit of all of us out on the street with our cameras.
Yeah, isn't it? It is quite an empire. I don't know what we're going to do next.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Whatever.
Conquer the world.
Yeah, well, thanks. No, thanks for the compliment. Yes. Flattery will get you everywhere.
So I'm counting on it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So Doug, anyway, I'll tell you how we connected, which is kind of an odd thing, but Doug's been a subscriber, and he went into his profile on our website, and I encourage everybody to fill out that profile because we do read them. And he must have changed his email address and had a typo in it or something. And I get all these messages when people's email is not delivered by our system. And I go, oh, look at this. This has happened several times. So I looked him up. So I went to his website, and then I fell in love with his work, which was distracting. So I was on there for quite a while. Anyway, so I found another email address for him, wrote to him, and I said, Doug, just want to let you know that your emails aren't working, so you're not going to get you're not going to get any messages that come from our system. So they fixed it, and I said in the email, by the way, I really like your work, and told me a little bit about it and some things he's going through. And so I invited him to be on the podcast. And then he wrote a nice article for us, what we're going to be publishing in April or May. Can't remember right now. But thanks for doing that. There's these happy accidents all the time. Well, and I love it when that happens.
Thank you, Bob. And in this day and age, to have a personal contact, a human, not a bot, to reach out is kind of a special thing, which is sort of a sad commentary, I guess. But regardless, when I got your email, I was touched and pleased and attended to the email problem. And after some hesitancy, accepted the invitation to visit with you here today. As I said when I responded, I don't know what I could possibly have to say of any interest, but nonetheless, here we are.
Well, your work speaks for itself. So I'm sure you'll have a lot to say. If not, the bad cop's coming after you.
I don't know how I earned this title.
Yeah. Well, I got that from once.
Oh, now I know.
So, Doug, you've been a photographer for a long time. Take a few minutes to tell us how you got started, why you do it.
Why I do it. Now, that's a big question. And
I know. We'll save that for later.
I'll see if I can tackle that in a little bit. But the easier part is the quick life story that got me here. I'm from the Midwest, and my father was an ardent amateur photographer. My uncle was an amateur photographer who also happened to manage a couple of camera stores. My cousin was a successful commercial photographer. So it was just sort of a given that Doug will have something to do with photography, and cameras were part of our life. And I never really thought about it. It just sort of accepted it. I guess it's sort of like growing up in a family of musicians, perhaps. You just kind of assume you can play music. So I started early on with my camera. And the tie-in that really set the hook was my junior year in college. And that was my first trip out of the country. And my father, wanting to make sure that I was properly armed for the trip, got me 2 Minolta SLRs. And one of them was loaded with Tri-X and one of them was loaded with Kodachrome. And so this kid from the Midwest headed to Greece and then Israel. My background, my undergraduate work was in religion and philosophy, of all things. So it only made sense to go to Greece and Israel. But the trip itself was life-changing. And it was life-changing because it opened up the world to me. And I just knew I wanted to travel as much and as long as I possibly could. And I've been able, fortunately, to fulfill most of that goal or a lot of that goal. And then secondly, taking the trip with the cameras was just a natural evolution of being out in the world. So it never seemed weird or to me that, not that it would be weird, but it just was natural that I would be traveling and I would have cameras with me. And so the young man of, I guess I was 19 or 20 at the time, set out that way. And I mean, you could have been with me when I was traveling last month, and it's basically the same profile. He's not so young anymore, but he's still out traveling, and he still has his. I'm down to just one camera now.
That's good. Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I'm a one camera, one lens sort of guy. But that's the evolution, the quick evolution of me as a photographer. And I hesitate to say photographer, but it's me as a traveler that takes pictures or a photographer that travels. Because to me, travel and photography are peanut butter and jelly. And I know I'm not.
Yeah, I
That's not a
agree.
unique idea, but that's just how it is in my life.
Do you still have those photos from that first trip?
I do. Actually, some people might not like it, but the way the Kodachrome ages, you look at them 40 years later and they've got this patina and the colors are all sort of muted. And now you just have to get a filter, to try to make that same image or a contemporary image look like that. But yes, I have those. I have all of those slides. They've stayed with me through lots of travels and lots of changes of location for almost 50 years. Unfortunately, I don't have the Minoltas anymore. I've gone through way too many cameras, but I'm not sentimental, but there is a part of me that always wish I'd held on to those cameras just for the sentiment of it.
Yeah, I still have was it 200, 10 or 201? I forget. Yeah, my first real camera was a Minolta.
Yeah. Great.
And I lost it to seawater.
I hope it was while you were doing something dangerous to get the great shot.
Well, yeah. It was we rented a little sailboat. Well, my wife and I were taking sailing lessons at home in Cleveland on Lake Erie. We were thinking of buying a sailboat. We were on vacation. We were in Nantucket, and I said, let's rent a little skiff. So we did, and it was a piece of junk. The centerboard wouldn't stay down. The wind was blowing right away from where the dock was, and we got pushed way out.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have the skills to get us back.
Right.
And the boat didn't flood, but got water in it, ruined my camera.
That's a pity.
Sounds like it was an adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an adventure. And there's more to it than that. Anyway, we're not here to talk about me. So, that's really something. That's how a lot of people get started, it seems.
I'll show you guys something. I'm not trying to get off topic.
No, that's fine.
I just got this from my grandfather.
What'd you get?
This was his.
Oh, look at you.
Oh,
Little
look at
Minolta.
that.
Yeah.
Well, tell us what it is.
It's an X370.
Really? Oh, that was very nice of him.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna be shooting film?
I bought some film. I haven't loaded it up and taken it out anywhere. So
There you
it's
go.
on my to-do list.
Ashley, like a lot of us have been taking digital photographs since we could. And I found myself a few years ago, in front of the computer screen, trying to tweak images so that they looked like they were film images.
Yeah.
And finally, I just threw up my hands and said, well, why don't you just go out and shoot film if that's what you want it to look like? So I went out and I bought this guy, an Icon F2.
Nice.
And started shooting film and just fell back in love with the whole process. I mean, that's how I started in photography. And then I'm not subject to a lot of what we call GAS, gear acquisition syndrome, but nonetheless, I got hooked on the film, and so I just started looking around for an old M3, and I found this one, and when I ran the serial number, I discovered that it was assembled the year I was born, 1955. So
Look at that.
Wow.
Crazy kid.
So I bought this, and I've traveled extensively with both of these cameras, and I love the deliberative process. I don't want to go off on a tangent too much here about film versus digital, but there's such a degree of intention. And so I found myself in London. This was 2 years ago, and I was there during the Chinese New Year's, and I was in Chinatown And there were just thousands and thousands of people around. And I had a digital camera with me. And that within a couple of hours, I just took hundreds and hundreds of photographs.
Mhm.
And when I got back and started reviewing those, I saw immediately how undisciplined and shoddy, and there was nothing deliberate about that night in Chinatown with my digital camera. It was just sort of in a panic mode of just trying to capture images because there were so many things happening. I didn't want to miss anything. And that's just not the way I like to roll in any aspect of my life. And that's really what drove me back hard and fast to shooting film, which then I did for quite a while. But ultimately, it was just me being lazy, because we can certainly be deliberative and thought
Mhm.
shooting digital just as much as we can with film. So that's my story about
So
Yeah. It's
returning.
hard to be though, because you just feel like you have unlimited, well, let me just try this and let me just try
Yeah.
this. Something that happens to me is when I start doing that and just free for all, when I come home, I almost don't even want to look at what I got because I got to get that card out and look at hundreds of
Yeah.
probably mostly bad photos.
Yeah.
So
It is a disincentive from that respect, certainly. Yeah.
so you still shooting Tri-X?
I haven't in a while, but when I
Yeah.
am shooting film, that's my go-to.
It's been so expensive.
Yeah, I have. That's part of what started driving me back toward digital is, even though I was developing my own Tri-X or Ilford, it is expensive. And then it is time consuming. And we live in a digital world. So then you're going to be scanning. And I just don't enjoy that process very much. So you can obviously send it to a lab and have them scan it, but it becomes very expensive very quickly. So
Yeah, and they could mess it up too.
yes. Yeah. So ultimately, I just end up trying to get my digital cameras to replicate as much as I can, my film process. I turn off the review. I only use a couple of functions, and I use
Mhm.
I use stripped down cameras anyway without a whole lot of buttons. My process is very film-like, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yep.
It took me a while
yeah.
to figure all that out, but I ended up getting there eventually. I'm slow on the uptake.
So, but you are primarily a monochrome photographer, right?
Yes, I am primarily a monochrome photographer.
I like that.
There's a story behind that. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I had done a portfolio review at the Magnum offices up in New York about 10
Cool.
years ago. And Constantine Manos and I were together, and he's going through my portfolio, and he said, "Are you a black and white photographer, or are you a color photographer?" Because at the time, my portfolio showed both genres. And I actually thought that was sort of a artificial binary sort of question.
Uh-huh.
And, Constantine Manos has been around. Unfortunately, we just lost him, but
Yeah.
he's been around a long time. And so part of me just thought, well, perhaps it's where he's coming from when you had to be, or mostly you were one or the other. But in this digital age, it doesn't really make a difference, So I carried on the way I had been for years. And recently, within the past 2 years, I made a conscious decision that I just love monochrome photographs, and I love the whole process. And I'm not working as a photographer anymore. And there's just really no reason. And I'm only shooting for myself and my own pleasure. And so there's really no reason that I shouldn't do exactly what I want to do, which is just take and make black and white photographs. And the interesting thing about ultimately making that decision, and I wish Constantine was still around so I could send him a note and tell him I appreciate the advice, although it took me 10 years to get to it, is that when I removed that option, I experienced this just tremendous freedom. And it was a freedom from yet another sort of question or decision to make. It's sort of the same reason I use prime lenses rather than zoom lenses. Zoom lenses are wonderful, and there's a place for them. But for me, it's just another decision that I want to get out of the way because it gets in between me and the work I'm trying to do. So when I remove the possibility, and I'm shooting with a monochromatic digital camera now. So the sensor is such that I cannot make a
Yeah.
color photograph. And the discipline of that was totally liberating. And it took away the frustration, ever so subtle, of walking around looking at photographs and thinking that would make a good color photograph because of the way the sun is reaching that facade versus, but look at that guy standing over there in that beam of light under the staircase, which would make a great black and white. So it eliminates the color facade, which is maybe something lost. But for me, it's just because I'm now focusing just in one direction. And that was a really good decision for me to make at this place in my photographic career.
Yeah, we try not to talk much about gear here, but I'm going to ask you a question anyway.
Bob can
I
never
also
resist one of these questions, at least.
Give
no,
it me one.
there goes a bad cop.
Go ahead,
No,
Doug.
I just no, I have a monochrome camera too,
Okay.
and so what do you have?
So,
I've got the Q2M.
okay. So
Yeah.
I've had a Q2 for, I guess about 5 or 6 years from when they first came out. And I just couldn't resist. I had gone down to DC recently to just do what like I like to do. And I tempted myself just a little too far by walking into the Leica
You
store.
went into the store.
I walked into the store and walked out with the Q3 monochrome.
Yeah.
And so I had disciplined myself. With the Q2, I had turned everything into, through the electronic viewfinder and I had turned everything into monochrome. So so the only time that it actually became a color image was when I would open it in the computer. It would default to the monochrome JPEG, but if I went to edit it, it would suddenly turn to color.
Yeah.
And that was terribly distracting. And I know that sounds like just a terrible whining, but it just
First world problem.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's a silly thing to complain about, but I'm just such a purist that I wanted to knock that out of my workflow. I wanted to just be solely committed to this one discipline from start to finish. So that was what was behind the decision.
Yeah.
Fits with
You know,
your minimalist personality.
Yeah,
there you go. Well, they're
Exactly.
very simple. They're very simple cameras.
Very simple cameras. And I know that
Yeah.
you're not about gear here, and I applaud that. I
Yeah.
think it's refreshing how you explore topics without turning
Well,
us heads.
I've been working on a long-term project for several years, photographing. People who listen to the show probably tired of hearing me mention this. Photographing the jazz community in town, and I started from the beginning to be all monochrome. And in the process, I was asked to photograph for our jazz society at their events or performances. And then, so I always had my Q2 with me, but I started bringing a Fuji to take some color shots, and they used my photos like in their annual report and
Right.
promotions online. And they never use any of my monochrome photos. They're always color. I go, come on now.
Right.
But yeah, that's what they like. Too bad.
Yeah. In fact, it happened to me this week. I'd gone out with my camera and just was walking around with it around my neck, and I ran into a press photographer, and we just started chatting. And his comment was that, and we had a similar conversation, that he loves black and white. He wishes he could shoot in black and white, but
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
he's doing media content, and editors don't want it. It doesn't sell, and so that's just the world he's working and living in. I just have the luxury of not having to work at it. I can do whatever I want.
That's right. That's right.
I don't take that luxury for granted. It's a pretty special place I find myself.
Yeah. Speaking of that, in the article you wrote for us, you talked about a friend's teacher. And I guess she said that she learned something from the teacher about not worrying about the final product.
Right.
More about the journey, I guess, than the destination. And you said you were going through a little bit of a dry spell, which happens to everybody. And I just wonder if you could walk us through your shift in perspective and how it changed your relationship to street photography in particular.
Sure. So there's a backstory to this that I think is pertinent. And I had decided a few years ago to get off of most of the mainstream social media sites. And I did it for personal reasons. It just was not what I wanted to be doing anymore. And, I had a rather substantial following on Instagram, and I enjoyed sharing my work. And what I didn't anticipate was when I got off of those platforms that the residual effect on my psyche was to find myself suddenly without basically someplace to show what I was doing, to show my work. And I had done exhibits, and I actually, we haven't talked about this, Bob, but I owned and curated a gallery for a while. It was called F64, and I represented photographers from all over the place. And
Really?
galleries are closed for the most part now, unless you're really one of the big dogs in the discipline. And so I found myself sort of high and dry. And as a result, I just started to kind of drift away from my enthusiasm, or I should say my enthusiasm started to drift away from me. And so I was in this sort of struggling place for a year or two. And I was recently traveling, and I happened to come across a photography book that photographer I wasn't familiar with. And I read a few of the things that the photographer had written. And she mentioned in it that her teacher had prompted her to not worry or pay or think so much about the final product, but to invest in the joy of actually making images. And when I read that, I realized that what basically I had been sort of had this Pavlovian response to Instagram and other social platforms. I recognized that I would be out with my camera and I would take pictures, and I wasn't at all really taking the pictures that I was more or less taking pictures because I was thinking this will look good when I put it up. This will get a lot of likes. I'll get comments. I mean, I wasn't quite so overt about it, but that's what was basically going on. And I had mixed up the horse and the cart, so to speak. And so when I read this comment about doing photography, but we could talk about any of the creative outlets that we as people do. You can do something creative to try to make a living at it, or to impress people, you can do it for lots of reasons. One of which is because you have a creative urge and you need to scratch this itch. I had forgotten that part of the creative urge, the sheer joy of just doing something for the joy of doing it without necessarily looking for validation. And validation is, I think, important, and it's something we probably need, most of us. It should come after the fact. It shouldn't be driving the process. And that's what I finally discovered I had been kind of doing. The validation, or my anticipation of the validation, was what was driving the process, which to me is backward. I wanted to try to get to the core of it. Here's a quick tangent. I studied Zen for about 10 years. And one of the first things my Zen teacher said to me was, what's the most important thing? And I thought for a minute, I told him what I thought was the most important thing. And then he said, well, what's the most important thing about the most important thing? I said that. And it just kept going on. No matter what you say, you can always say, well, what's the most important part about that? And so I was so many steps removed from the most important part of it, which was to do something that speaks to me creatively and gives me pleasure from the sheer aspect of making something. And so when I read the comment, it immediately sort of was a kick in the seat of the pants. And I started to dig myself out of this hole that I'd been in. It doesn't mean that I'm still not frustrated because of the outlets that I don't avail myself of and the path I've chosen to. But that is pretty well offset at this point by my commitment to just doing the things that I love to do as a creative person. And if I could just bore you with one more quick story that I think speaks to this.
Definitely.
Okay. I lived in Maine for 8 years, and I spent a lot of time up in the North Woods. Northern New England spans 20,000 square contiguous undeveloped miles of wilderness. And I would just go up there with my dog and just get lost. And one day I was doing this up there at a beautiful sunny day, and I was going down this logging road, which had been cleared probably 100 years before. Then they peter out, and that's usually where I would stop and put up my tent, and that's where I'd hang out for a while. And I did that, and I saw this big field of St. John's wort, just wild. And I got out and I started harvesting it, throwing it in a trash bag because you can make tea out of it and dry it and make tea, and it's good for you. And after about an hour or two of doing this, I came around this corner of trees, and there was this structure. Now, I was about 3 or 4 hours from the nearest village and a couple of hours from the Canadian border. And I happened to come across this stone wall, about 4 feet tall, about 5 feet long. And leaning against the stone wall at an angle were a bunch of trees that were about 10, 12 feet long, They'd been stripped of all of the branches, and they were all about 8 to 10 inches in diameter. And all of them, the points of the ends of them had been shaved off. And the shaved off conical ends had been painted beige. And the point of each conical end had been painted a different color, red, blue, green. They were each a 10 or 12 foot tall colored pencil. It was a collection of colored pencils that had been set down by some alien or some giant against the stone wall up in the middle of nowhere. And I realized when I discovered this that I had happened across a sculpture by somebody who had made something, had done something creative without any possibility of any number of people discovering it or finding it or enjoying it, or validation was out of the question. This was an act of pure creative motivation. And that settled on me so deeply. And the footnote to that is I wrote an article about it and put up a picture of this sculpture that I discovered later. And about a year or two later, I got an email from someone who sent me a link to a webpage. I went to the link, and it was a woman in Scandinavia, Finland, or Denmark or someplace, no longer with us, but she would go around the world and put herself into these really remote places, and she would make a sculpture of found objects. She would take pictures of them, put them up on her website, but she would give no indication of where they were. And I saw on her
That's
website
really fun.
similar sculptures that she had put elsewhere in the world, and I had discovered one. So back to the question and my long-winded response. I want to be like the woman who goes out into the woods and does something that is so fulfilling and gratifying that she doesn't even need to tell anybody about it. Can you imagine what that would be like? Vivian Meyer in our discipline, maybe that's part of what she experienced. I don't know. Emily Dickinson, I think of in poetry and literature.
The question that comes to my mind, I mean, this is such a deep topic, but how do you avoid the
Don't worry about it.
validation factor?
No problem. Sorry, Ashley.
Sorry,
That's
actually,
okay.
Cooper
You know,
will
we're
apologize when he comes back in the room. So
We like dogs.
we don't mind.
I'm sorry.
I
Ashley,
have a
could you
3-year-old. That's like the same amount of noise, you know.
understand? Yes. I completely missed you.
I'm sorry. Anyway, I interrupted you. The dog was fine. It was just me. Go ahead.
No worries. So, like the validation factor, how do you avoid it? Nowadays, let's say a younger person is growing up on Instagram. They're growing up getting their life validated basically from day one. And you're right, you start kind of getting addicted to it without even realizing it. So, I mean, how do you unlearn that? What did you do to unlearn that? Like you said, it hasn't been easy.
I'm still unlearning it, and I don't have a clear answer for that. Maybe I'll get back to you in a year or so when I have figured that out. I think part of what I'm experiencing is just the luxury of maturity. I mean, at this stage in my life, I still want validation, but it's a lot less important than if I was 20 or 30 or 40 years old. And it is just the world that we're living in. And that's the way the world is turning. And I think the only advice I can even think that would be helpful is to just spend some time, no matter what your creative outlet, spend some time just really getting to know yourself to the point where you can kind of be obsessive about your own voice and what you want to do. And it becomes so important to you that you're not going to let anybody change it. Yeah, it's sort of like if you ever read Catcher in the Rye, or any number, I guess, of self-help books, which I'm not into, but that path of self-knowledge is very difficult. And unfortunately, the challenges we have from a technical standpoint, although they afford us great comforts and interests and ease of living, they have a potential to sort of undermine what we might call our more authentic self. And getting to that place is it's not easy to peel back what you need to get there. So I don't have an answer, and I'm rambling, and I apologize for that. But I've spent a lot of time, and part of my journey has been just trying to explore how others have kind of dealt with self-challenging issues through creative expression. And I think the more I understand why I'm trying to do something creatively, the more important it becomes to me to do it authentically and to my own terms. And a lot of what I see on social media doesn't really say to me that this is a very important thing for this individual. It's just something that is convenient to put up because they've made a commitment to post every day or however it comes together. But I hesitate to even talk about aesthetics and art because it's just something that's hard for me to try to get my head around. But let's just be really bold for a minute and say if you want to be an artist, however that comes together for you, if you want to be an artist, you need to make some hard decisions about what that is going to mean. And it has to, and if you make that commitment to being an artist, you also have to be really earnest toward that commitment. It's not something to do because it's cool. It's something you do because basically you have to. It's, the few true artists that I've either studied or met, it's what they have to do. And the other thing I guess I've learned is that at different places in my life, this is not a static thing. It's not a decision you make and then everything changes, because life isn't that way. It's a thing that you kind of carry and nurture and you protect. And it might not be the time in your life where you take it out and you polish it, but it's still in your pocket, and you know that you're going to take it out and polish it later, but you just can't do that right now. But you just still nurture it as this really private, important thing. And you anticipate when you get to the place and everything is right, you'll be able to take it out, polish it, and do with it everything you want to do. And it takes just a lot of patience. And so, you're talking to a 70-year-old guy who's been wrestling with this all of his life. And, finally I'm at this place where I can just say, yeah, okay, it's out of my pocket. I burnish it every day. I polish it. I study it, tuck it in at night, so.
I like the way you put that though, Doug, because Bob and I have had this conversation before where you look at some of the greats, quote unquote, in street photography that have done really amazing work. And sometimes their personal story is like their family was a mess, or they're just super lone wolf personality. And you kind of feel like, well, if I want to be a good artist, I'm just going to have to abandon my family and only do this. And that's not real life either.
Yeah.
So that's
you're
a
not gonna
really
do that.
that's a nice way to look at it. Like, it's there. It might not be the time for it, but it's there, and you're not going to throw it away either, just because life got busy or you're in a certain season of life.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've learned too, and Bob, you had said that, we all kind of go through these dry spells and it just happens. And this dry spell for me was just longer than I had experienced. So it had this spice of panic associated with it.
Oh.
But what I've learned is that, if you just wait and take a breath, and it might take a breath of months, but these wells, they'll fill up again. And I was just having a conversation with a woman this weekend, much smarter than I am, and does a lot of research into creativity and neuroscience. And she explained she explained a phenomenon that I was very familiar with, and it was like other people experience this. And basically, what she had found in it was that there is almost like this physical urge with these creative people that goes dormant, and then it becomes manifest in this way that they cannot ignore. And that's when they execute. And happens with different degrees of, let's say, aggression. That's not the right word, but of different degrees of impact, let's say. So
Intensity.
sometimes these needs to express are just small little things, but we do it, and we have to respect those just like we respect the big things that we do when those big urges hit. And for me, it's like I feel like a bubble that's being released at the bottom of a pond, and as it wiggles its way to the surface, it's expanding. And when she mentioned this to me, I thought, I've experienced this all of my life. And then I just wait until I can feel the next bubble that just starts to expand. So there's comfort in knowing that it will happen, but there's panic involved when you don't see it happening as rapidly as you want. So, and maybe that's part of aging.
I was interviewed a gentleman named Michael Eugster. He lives in Switzerland, street photographer, of course. That's all I talk to. Seems like it. Anyway, he has a really nice Substack, and he interviewed Paul Kessel. I don't know if you know Paul Kessel in New York. Paul was, in his younger days, he was a very competitive golfer. I'm sure he's probably a scratch golfer. I didn't ask him about it. And he told Michael, now he's does mainly street photography, and he said that, and Paul, if you're listening, I'm going to thank you for this because I thought it was a really nice pearl of wisdom. And, with golf, if you, are you a golfer at all?
Um,
Okay. You let something get inside your head, you're going to be worthless. And, so if you're a competitor and you're competing at a high level, you have to have a pretty clear head. And Paul said it's just like street photography is the same way. He said when I'm competing at a high level, I don't try. I just do it. And the same thing with street photography. He said, stop trying. That's hard to do.
It's, in my experience, it's a fashion of openness that
Mhm.
sort of, it's interesting you bring golf into it because although I'm not a golfer, I have golfed a couple of times and I don't particularly enjoy the sport. But a couple of times I
A couple
did.
of times was enough for you.
It was enough for me. I
Don't
could take this 4 hours and I could be on the street with my camera. What am I
Yes.
thinking? But when you hit the ball and you get that solid sound and it
Yep.
goes where you want it to go,
Yeah.
and it
It's 2
goes,
times in a day. Yes.
yeah. And when that happens, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, I get it. I get that's
Yeah.
why you return to it because that is so satisfying. My limited experience with golf, but I have it in other aspects of my life, in that flow zone, as it's been labeled, is a difficult place to get to. But once you've gotten to it, you can sort of trick it to come back into your life easier the next time, in my experience. I used to be a climber. And
Mm.
so that those experiences where suddenly I find myself in another place on this mountain wall that I don't remember how I got there, or in a more pertinent to our conversation, I'll come back and I'll put the SD card into my computer. And this doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while I'll see an image that I just don't remember. And it's the
Huh.
image, it's the one that, well, was in that zone. I was in that state of flow.
Huh.
And for me, and maybe it's the Zen training that I mentioned earlier, but it's that ability to just kind of quiet the monkey mind and put yourself into an environment with such depth and commitment that that's all you're experiencing, is that moment of that commitment in this environment. And that's not really, for me, I can't speak to anybody else's experience, but for me, that's not really a place where consciousness is at the forefront of the process. It's in there. We can't escape that. But there are other things that are happening that
Hmm.
sort of come up and call for attention. And that's like hitting the golf ball. When that happens, you just want that to happen as much
Yeah.
as.
In that game, you could shoot 100, but you get a couple of those good shots, that feeling, that sound, it keeps
Something
you coming back,
does. Yeah, yeah.
even amidst all the frustration it causes.
And, and again, I don't want to get too highfalutin, but for me, art is really important part of my life. And whether it be what an old professor used to call serious art music, or art that's hanging on a wall, or art that I find, in a field in northern Maine someplace, those experiences at their highest level are the same experiences for me. I've been very fortunate. I've seen the Michelangelo's David in Florence any
Mhm.
number of times. And the first time I don't know if you've seen it, but it's
Mhm.
basically in a room in a museum all by itself. And
Yeah.
you walk in and you turn this hallway, and at the end of this hallway is the David. And the first time I saw it, I just started crying. I mean, I just turned that corner and I just welled up. And every time I've seen it since, my reaction is the same.
Really.
And if I listen to the fifth movement of Beethoven's Choral Symphony, same response. And that is a really wonderful gift for me when something happens to me like that, in the presence of, not only aside from the whole aesthetics and the experience of it, but it also reminds me that as humans, we are capable of such grief and tragedy and bad stuff.
Yeah.
And that seems to be so much the attention of where we place our way in the world, all of the stuff that's going wrong and all the stuff that we're responsible for. But when I see the David, it's like, but we can also do this. And the way we've moved through the world as a species isn't mitigated by the David or the Ninth Symphony, but it helps. It helps me cope. And there's absolutely very little connection between what I do with my camera and those experiences, other than that's what I aspire to. So my motivation is basically is self-preservation. The more of these sorts of experiences I can enjoy, better I'm protecting myself and those people I come in contact with, I'm a better human being as a result.
So, is there any piece of your own work that gives you that feeling for what that you had when you first saw Dave?
I love the question. And my immediate response is I've gotten close a couple times. And there are a few times I've spent a lot of time over this past year kind of going back through my portfolio, my archive. There's some themes that I've noticed that are pretty interesting to me that I wasn't aware of. Every once in a while, I'll look at something that maybe I don't forget much in the way of my pictures, but I'm just reminded that, that's pretty good. You got kind of close to what you were hoping to accomplish with that. And I think if you were to talk to a writer or a musician or anybody, if you can get close consistently, that's no small thing. Now I can't
Yes.
consistently, but a couple times I do, and it's very satisfying. Nothing like the impact of the David, but that's why it's the David, right?
Yeah. It was Michelangelo.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a strong argument for continuing with creative endeavors, even though you don't feel, or maybe you don't label yourself as an artist. Because I've thought about these things before, especially like Bob and I spend our time looking at photos that are amazing from people all over the world. Like, I'm probably never going to take anything like that. And sometimes it makes you feel like, why should I bother? Because I don't feel like I'm ever going to get to that level. But I feel like what you're saying is a really strong argument for just creating for, like you said earlier, for creativity's sake. Even if you're not a person who maybe feels like I have to create to survive, it's good for us.
It's good for us. It should be part of our daily intake, minimum daily requirement. But I don't know about you guys. It's not something I used to, when I was living in Maine, it was something I was able to practice every day. And I still think about it in the way that I used to study a musical instrument. It is something that I don't always feel inspired to do, but it is something I've made a commitment to. And that means I want to touch it every day just to remind myself of that commitment. And sometimes that's not actually pressing a shutter, but it's going through an archive or doing some editing on a second-rate image just because you want to touch the craft. And if I was a musician, I would just say, I've got to practice my scales today before I make dinner. It's just, that's what I do. And so these little reminders on a daily basis build up, and then they become more a substantive part of our life. And it rewards you, those disciplines. Practicing the scales rewards you because the next time you're trying to play something by, sight reading, your fingers know what they're supposed to do. They're taking care of their job. But the whole thing about creativity, regardless of how you express it, to me is it's something I have been thinking a lot about over the last couple of years. And it's a lot more important than I gave it credit for, not only in my own life, but just in the world in general that I gave credit for. So it kills me when art classes are pulled out of my grandkids' schools and institutions. Michelangelo had his patrons, and arts don't have any patrons to speak of these days, at least not much.
Did that make it hard for you to close your gallery? Like, in a sense, you were one of the ones who was, getting that art out there, making it available to people. I mean, that must have been kind of a tough journey. I don't know. You tell me.
So the gallery was extremely rewarding, and it served the community, and it was supported, and it was just something I loved doing. And it taught me a lot about photography. It taught me a lot about how to see. I was looking at a lot of portfolios. It helped me understand better what I like and don't like. There were just benefits every which way. But economically, galleries, it's just so hard to sustain them. And I had photographers whose work I just loved and I just wanted them to be successful in my gallery because I loved their work and I loved them. And so it was hard that way. It was heartbreaking, but I was in the process of moving to Maine, so it was going to get closed regardless of that. But there was a situation that just really I can't let go of, and that was One of the photographers I represented was Allison Wright. Allison died tragically about 3 years ago, but she was a friend of mine. She was a National Geographic photographer. And I traveled with Allison, and we'd hung out a lot over the years. And I had her work on the wall. And there was a mom and a young man. This was about Christmas time, came into the gallery. And this is nothing against mom, nothing against the young man, but it spoke to me volumes about a lot of things. And they're looking in front at one of Allison's photographs. Her first book was on the Dalai Lama, and it was a photograph that I still own that she had taken of the Dalai Lama's hand holding a rosary. And mom said to the kid, "Jimmy, you could do that." And my reaction was a little like Bob's. I was incredulous. And I wanted to jump up and say, "Jimmy, you can't do that. You maybe someday will be able to do that." And then she went on to talk about the camera that he had gotten for Christmas, which I thought was wonderful. And I don't know what that story says about much of anything. It doesn't say anything much flattering about me, certainly, because my reaction was sort of quite negative toward the comment, and disdainful. You can't do that, and that isn't fair to them. But that was my reaction, because what I observed was the craft of Allison Wright and the work and the career and everything that she had put into her life as a photographer, getting to the top of her craft, was represented in that image. And for whatever reason, it wasn't recognized and it wasn't appreciated as I thought it should be and as I wanted it to be. And it just kind of said, man, there's just a chasm between what that is and what this response to it is, that I can try, but I'll never really be able to bridge that chasm. Ultimately, I guess it comes down to, different strokes, different folks. Everybody has different things that they appreciate and are pulled toward, and some, they don't pay any attention to. But the gallery was an opportunity for me to try to help photographers show their work. We had wonderful opening nights that just filled Main Street, and photographers were happy, and every once in a while I got to send them a check. It was just, when it lasted, it was really lovely. For me, and I'm talking way too much here, but for me personally, not only all of that, but once a month I would have a emerging photographers exhibit. And it was an open call, and I just had young photographers bringing me in portfolios all the time. And for me, it was a lesson in how to look, how to actually read a photograph, how to spend time trying to appreciate somebody's effort. It taught me a lot about the craft, taught me about how I respond to it, how I want, what I want to do. Again, if you're a writer, you read a lot. If you're a musician, you listen a lot. If you're a photographer, you got to look a lot. Look at other people's work and ask you. For me, I have to say, why is this photograph in this book? I don't understand it, and challenge myself to try to figure out what's going on here. What did she want me to see when she made this photograph? So the journey is just so exciting from every aspect. The beginning, walking the streets and trying to get that openness, that sort of Zen openness, and allowing the images to present themselves, to looking at the books, to going to exhibits. There's a good reason why all of us are so consumed by it, isn't there?
Yeah. So where was your gallery?
So I'm outside of Baltimore, and about 5-6 miles down the road is this lovely little village called Ellicott City. It's down by a river. It's an old mill town, and it's full of little boutiques and all the sorts of things that you have in those sort of little rolling hill Appalachian sort of places. And we opened in one location and then later moved to a second location. All told, it was up there for a few years, and it was close to home. So I could go and just hang out there and look at pictures and talk to people about photography. And
Life was good.
nonprofit. The money we made from it went to a foundation that my wife and I had started that was trying to get kids out into the world to just experience the world for the reason of get out in the world and experience it. And so
My mother started a gallery
Mm.
in my hometown,
photography.
in Appalachia, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
I never knew that, Bob.
Yeah, she did. It was a co-op gallery.
Yeah.
Ran it for years. She finally spent so much time there, and it was starting to bother her. She decided to move to Texas just to get away from it. She didn't. Well, she did. Another story. Hey, before we go, I have to
Yes.
ask you about something. So you have a presence on glass.
Yes.
You know what? I had never heard of that until I saw that you were on there, and it looks very interesting. What can you tell us about it, and what does it do for you?
So Glass is sort of a refuge for a lot of us that want to connect on some sort of media platform. It's not subject to algorithms. It doesn't have likes or dislikes, which took me quite a while to kind of get used to. It's a gallery, it's a online platform of photography for photographers. And I have found and built a fabulous and supportive community there. Don't want to turn this into a commercial,
Mhm.
but it has been sort of the saving grace for me. And so when I put up images, I have a lot of friends, a few of whom I've met. I was in London and a friend of mine from Glass is there. We got together for a couple of days of photo walks. It's not all virtual. The downside for some people is that there's a fee involved. I think it's like $30 or $40 a year to be
Oh,
on it.
yeah.
And for me, that is something I want to support. And so it's not big tech, it's not algorithms, and they've done everything they can to build a community of support. So that's what Glass is. That's how I use it. And I know there are lots of different venues out there now looking for people that are exploring other ideas besides Instagram. And Glass is where I've landed. And as I've mentioned to you elsewhere, I'm looking at a few others. You know, you mentioned your friend on Substack and Blue Sky
Mhm.
and Mastodon. You know, there are lots of them out there. The challenge is just finding your community wherever that is and then investing in it. So there's the validation, Ashley, that I still am seeking, that I still enjoy out there. I'm not completely monk-like in my aesthetics. So that's us.
Well, Doug, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? Either your website, Glass, not Instagram.
No, not Instagram, sadly.
That's
Yes.
fine with me, by the way.
Well, yeah, it is pretty limited at this point. My webpage is my name, Doug Bruns, Doug Bruns Photography. Nothing very inventive about that. And I'm on Glass at DP Bruns, and you'll find me hunting and pecking around in a few other corners of the internet. But for now, that's the main place. I really long to get back to some place where I can do some work and see it on a wall.
Yeah.
That
Mm.
y- y- that is so I've not completely given up hope that I can't find that sort of venue. And like your mom with her co-op gallery, Bob, those are popular and mostly they're sustainable as I've observed them. It sounds like it certainly was for your mother. And maybe that's a solution, but I think it behooves all of us to maybe look a little closer to home as avenues to share what we do. And it's easier to build a community perhaps that way. And that's, yeah. So just put me in a search finder for Doug Bruns and I'll pop up in a couple of places.
And to be clear, how do you spell Bruns? It sounds like Browns, but it's not.
As my mother used to tell people, it's runs with a B. So it's Bruns.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I really have enjoyed visiting with you too so much. And
Same here.
like I said, it's been an honor
Likewise.
to be on your podcast and I very much appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm glad we connected.
Me
I'm
too.
sorry you're leaving the area because you're not
Yeah.
far away. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we didn't touch on that, but I'm
Yep.
headed to, as Mark Twain said, the parts unknown for a while. And part of that is to address the stuff we're talking about.
Yep.
To try to every once in a while, I think the artist has to go back and put some fresh paint on the palette. And again, I'm not so pretentious as to call myself an artist, but I can appreciate a new venue and how we all are somewhat usually invigorated by paints on the palette. So wishing you all the best and
Same
happy
here.
creative lives and thanks again for everything you're doing.